Come to order. Over the next hour or so, we're going to talk about federal regulations and our small manufacturers. Regulations are not just words on paper. They impact the way millions of Americans try to earn a living every day. We've always been a nation of makers and builders. That's why American manufacturers, including and especially small manufacturers, are critically important to the American economy. The term "made in the USA" is a source of pride for so many people. It's a reminder that if we want, we can build our own future. These days, unfortunately, a lot of people feel they can't build their own future. It's not for lack of ideas. It's oftentimes because of the burden of federal regulations. I look forward to hearings like this one because it gives us the chance to hear from real people about the real-life impact of regulations. In a survey by the National Association of Manufacturers last year, 88% of manufacturers said federal regulations were a significant challenge. When the National Federation of Independent Business, the NFIB, surveyed its members, they overwhelmingly responded that, quote, government requirements and red tape are the biggest problems they face, unquote. These are regulations that came out of the federal government in the last month alone. February, the shortest month of the year. How can we expect our small businesses to focus on creating jobs and bringing new ideas to life when odds are something in these pages will have a substantially negative impact on them? And even worse, they likely had no input at all in what these regulations say. Let me say at the outset, I'm not against all federal regulations. I'm against dumb federal regulations. That's, for example, why I hope the Senate will soon take up the Small Business Regulatory Flexibility Improvements Act. We passed that bill in the House recently to bring our regulatory system into the 21st century and stop putting small businesses at a competitive disadvantage. The regulatory burdens currently fall most heavily on small businesses, particularly manufacturers like those who are with us today, because they have to pay for compliance costs just like their larger competitors, but with only a fraction of the resources. The Small Business Regulatory Flexibility Improvements Act would give small businesses the input in the regulatory process they should have had all along. That input can't come soon enough. One of the best things about being a member of Congress is that we get to see many perspectives. We talk to small business owners and employees, like our witnesses today, and we get to see how other countries approach their regulatory process. While many of our international economic competitors are making way for innovative, cutting-edge reforms, the United States has changed little about the way it regulates since the 1980s. If we want to remain a global economic leader, we have to modernize. We have to make the small businesses that provide livelihoods for about half of all American families a part of the solution, not the biggest loser in an economy that desperately needs them to succeed. Ms. Reichert, Ms. Herskowitz, and Mr. Peterson, thank you for taking what I know is very valuable time away from your workplaces today to share your stories with us. And Mr. Goodwin, I look forward to hearing your thoughts on the difficulties your fellow witnesses face. With that, I yield to the ranking member, Ms. Velasquez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome to all the witnesses. Recent economic data makes clear that small businesses will continue to be a driving force in our economy. Small firms added 191,000 workers to their payrolls in the first 2 months of this year. We must continue fostering this type of growth. The regulatory process is important to our nation's small businesses in many ways. How regulations are formulated and approved can affect entrepreneurs' bottom lines very directly. This is especially true in the manufacturing sector, which is the focus of many worker protection, environmental, and energy regulations authorized by Congress. Did you hear me well? Those regulations are authorized by Congress. It's not that a cabinet member is sitting there and out of the air decided to enact regulations. We, members of Congress, we pass legislation, and that is the basis of those regulations. In that regard, this committee has taken an active role in ensuring more companies' needs are taken into account during the federal rulemaking process. I think it would be safe to say that in some instances, agencies have endeavored to examine how new regulations impact small firms. Unfortunately, in other cases, agencies have sidestepped their statutory responsibility to weigh how new rules will impact small entities and consider policy alternatives that might prevent economic harm. It is important we continue our work to ensure agencies pay close attention to small companies' needs. Lacking the economies of scale enjoyed by the larger competitors, small businesses often face higher compliance costs. Overall, when it comes to the regulatory environment, the challenging is balancing the benefits of important worker protections, environmental safeguards, and consumer safety measures against economic consequences. Too often, this debate is framed in a strictly either-or context, meaning we must choose between harming small businesses and preserving important protections that keep workers and consumers safe. Instead of taking that tack, it seems a better option is focusing on regulating in a thoughtful manner that is sensitive to the burden imposed on small companies. The regulatory review process that Congress and the President have updated is meant to achieve that goal, taking small firms' needs into account. In that regard, it is my hope we can learn more about how mechanisms like regulatory flexibility and the Small Business Regulatory Enforcement Act are minimizing the regulatory impact on small companies. Likewise, there may be other ways that federal agencies can lessen small business compliance costs, whether it is through technical assistance, legal advice, or other steps. I will hope this sort of proactive thinking can also be part of the discussion. All of us share the goals of protecting workers, preserving our environment, and keeping consumers safe. Additionally, none of us want these protections to hurt small companies or impede job growth. And by working together, I think we can achieve both goals. With that, I think I yield back the balance of my time. And again, I welcome all the witnesses, and I thank you for being here.
Thank you very much. If committee members have an opening statement prepared, I'd ask that they be submitted for the record. And I'll take just a moment to refer to our timing and lighting system here. Each witness gets 5 minutes, as I'm sure you know. Green light will be on for 4 minutes. The yellow light will come on, let you know you got a minute to kind of wrap up. The red light will come on, and we'd ask you to wrap up your testimony as close to that time as possible. We'll give you a little bit of flexibility, but not a whole lot. And I'd now like to introduce our panel, or at least portions of it, and a couple other members will also introduce other members. Our first witness is Cynthia Reichert. She is the Executive Vice President of Ariel Essence. I want to make sure I pronounce Ariel Essence. It's a flavor and fragrance company in Marietta, Georgia. Ariel Essence was founded by Ms. Reichert's uncle in 1977 and is a family-owned and operated small business. She leads the company's teams of perfumers, evaluators, and marketing experts to develop innovative ideas for signature fragrances. Ms. Reichert is actively involved in several industry trade associations and is testifying on behalf of the International Fragrance Association of North America, and we welcome you here this morning. Our next witness will be Janice Herskovitz. She is the president and CEO of PRL Inc. in Lebanon County, Pennsylvania. PRL makes and supplies high-quality metal castings for the defense, nuclear, and petrochemical industries. PRL was founded in 1972 when Ms. Herskovitz's father purchased a small company with 13 employees. She became the president of PRL in 1989. Ms. Herskovitz is testifying on behalf of the American Foundry Society, and we thank you for being here today as well. I'd now like to turn to my colleague from Michigan, Mr. Huizinga, to introduce our next witness. I do that all the time, and I apologize.
That's all right, Mr. Chairman. Well, we know that everybody from Ohio has got a thing against Michigan anyway. So, but we'll see what happens in the tournament here. But all right, well. I do deeply appreciate the opportunity to come here and be here with this committee today, and appreciate you holding this important hearing. And additionally, I appreciate you allowing me to introduce my friend Victor Anderson, who is an engineer with a company called Structural Concepts, which is located in Norton Shores, Muskegon area in my district, along Lake Michigan. And Structural Concepts is an innovative manufacturer that has been operating for 43 years. I've had a number of opportunities to go in and meet with them and kind of keep appraised of what is going on. Structural Concepts is a market leader in energy-efficient, temperature-controlled food cases for florists, supermarkets, and food service retailers. Little companies you may have heard of, like one from Seattle called Starbucks. They are main suppliers for them. They have developed the industry's most energy-efficient and lowest life cycle cost refrigerated food display cases, and I know that we have all seen and experienced and interacted with their products or the products of someone like them. And because of newly proposed regulations, actually, not legislation implemented by Congress or passed by Congress, but in fact regulations proposed and developed by EPA and the DOE, which are in conflict with each other, Structural Concepts' ability to produce their most self-contained equipment is in jeopardy. And I look forward to having Victor and their other witnesses share more about the challenges facing small businesses as they are holding Washington, D.C. bureaucrats accountable, so employers like Structural Concepts and the others can grow, thrive, and create jobs in communities across this country. So again, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate the opportunity to be here with you, and Victor, welcome.
Thank you very much. I'll now yield to the ranking member so she can introduce our next witness.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I present to the committee Mr. James Goodwin. He is a senior policy analyst for the Center for Progressive Reform, where he provides counsel on regulatory matters with a focus on environmental and energy policy. Prior to joining the center in 2008, he worked at the Environmental Law Institute. He is a published author with articles on environmental law and policy appearing in the Michigan Journal of Public Affairs and the New England Law Review. He graduated magna cum laude from the University of Maryland School of Law and also the University of Maryland Graduate School of Public Policy, where he graduated as valedictorian. Welcome, and thank you for being here today.
Thank you very much for that introduction. And we'll now go to our witnesses, and we'll begin with you, Mr. Reichert, and you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Good morning. My thanks to Chairman Shabbat, Ranking Member Velazquez, and the members of the Small Business Committee for inviting me to testify. My name is Cynthia Reichard. I'm the Executive Vice President of Aerolessence, and we are a Georgia-based manufacturer that works in partnership with consumer product companies to develop fragrances that transform products into winning brands and consumers into passionate fans. I can unequivocally state that Aerolessence is hindered by increasing regulatory burdens. Today, I'll focus on one in particular administered by OSHA. I'm proud to say that we're a family-owned and operated small business. As you said, my uncle founded Aerolessence in 1977. He had a dream. He borrowed against everything he owned and opened with 3 employees. We now have 120, supplying 1,000 manufacturers in the U.S. and abroad. We care deeply about our employees. We train and promote from within. We provide excellent benefits, tuition reimbursement, and offer on-site educational and fitness programs. I'm also proud to speak for the International Fragrance Association North America, which represents the fragrance supplier industry in the U.S. Like all AFRANA members, Aerolessence sources ingredients from around the globe and crafts unique formulations incorporated into everything from perfumes and lotions to candles and cleaning products. In the U.S., AFRANA's members market more than 90% of all scents and support more than 240,000 American small businesses. Creating a fragrance is a marriage of art and science. We work with thousands of ingredients like natural essential oils such as lavender and rose, and man-made ingredients developed from sustainable raw materials. We and our clients face extensive regulations across agencies, including EPA, OSHA, FDA, DEA, DOT, and FAA, plus all of the state and local regulations. We have the equivalent of 6 full-time employees who are dedicated solely to regulatory compliance. Ever-increasing burdens raise the cost of doing business in the U.S., limiting reinvestment in our company and our employees. In 2008, we planned to expand by building a large R&D facility and hiring 50 more. Due to the economy, the effect of increased taxes, and costly compliance with regulations, we have delayed many of these plans. Today, I want to share our experiences in complying with OSHA's Hazard Communications Standard, OSHA's interpretation of the Globally Harmonized System for Classification and Labeling of Chemicals, or GHS. It began as a UN harmonization initiative billed as a cost-saving device that would provide consistency and ensure workers clearly understand the materials they're in contact with. In 2011, the Obama administration estimated it would realize $585 million in annualized savings for employers. In truth, GHS is the opposite. It is neither global nor harmonized. And it has taken us 3 years to implement and cost us over $500,000 hard dollars and untold labor hours, all without safety benefits to employees. Complying is complex and requires extensive operational changes. Manufacturers and distributors must identify and classify chemicals based on a complicated GHS hierarchy. All of this information must be included on safety data sheets, or SDSs, and labels which must be affixed to workplace products. Labels must include color pictograms and informational symbols and signal words and lengthy hazard statements. OSHA's different treatment of samples is problematic for industry. Canada and the EU allowed for small package exemptions. Despite pleas from manufacturers, OSHA did not, resulting in a costly and incredibly burdensome process. When asked to create a rose scent, Aerol Essence typically sends 2 to 5 samples to a potential client, all containing different ingredients. Unlike industries that ship in large sample quantities, ours sends in extremely small half-ounce bottles. Now, rather than requiring an SDS only on products purchased, each small sample must include the complex labeling and safety data communications. Aerol Essence sends 10,000 samples per year, requiring thousands of safety data sheets and labels for half-ounce samples that may never be sold. In addition, OSHA has issued no guidance as to how labels are to be affixed to small packaging. Without this label attached to this bottle, we are going to be subjected to severe OSHA fines. This is just one example of how small businesses like ours continue to struggle due to the increasing costs of unnecessary regulations. Regulation without representation needs to be replaced with clear understanding of the impacts and proactive solutions that don't unfairly disadvantage small firms. Thank you for the opportunity to testify.
Thank you very much. Ms. Herskovich, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Shabbat, Ranking Member Velasquez, and the members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify before you to discuss regulatory burdens impacting the U.S. metal casting industry. I'm Jan Hershkowitz, President of PRL Inc., which is a holding company of a foundry and upgrading facility and 2 machine shops. My family moved to the States from Bolivia in 1971 to live the American dream. In 1972, my father purchased a small company with 13 employees, which he quickly expanded. After leaving Zenith Electronics, I became president following his death in 1989. PRL currently has 4 manufacturing locations and is a proud supplier of high-specification castings for the military, nuclear, and energy sectors. Our foundry, which is our smallest company, only has 13 employees. I'm very proud of our highly skilled workforce who play a critical role in our nation's defense, and their dedication to quality is reflected in our customer base, which includes Northrop Grumman, Curtiss-Wright, and PSE&G. I am testifying before you today as upcoming proposed regulations, although well-intended, are so threatening that I fear it may jeopardize the future of the U.S. foundry industry. I'm here on behalf of the American Foundry Society, our industry's trade association comprised of more than 7,500 members. Over 80% of U.S. metal casters and small businesses employing 100 workers or less. Again, over 80% of foundries employ 100 workers or less, with Ohio having the most foundries in the country. Over 90% of all manufactured goods and capital equipment are in some way dependent on castings. Our military utilizes metal castings in all sectors, including submarines, tanks, and other components, making the need for domestic production vital for our national defense. Metal casters are the world's original recyclers, as we make new castings by remelting scrap metal and recycling the majority of the sand that we use. AFS members are highly committed to protecting their employees and implementing sound safety policies. PRL's culture is one of safety first, as the risks of pouring molten metal are taken very seriously by every coworker, and we continually invest in safety equipment, consultants, and training. I will only discuss a few regulations that will impact us, as my submitted testimony reviews the regulations in detail. Of biggest concern is OSHA's proposed crystalline silica rule, which would create a massive and complicated new regulatory structure for the control of silica. Under this one-size-fits-all rule, it would ban dry sweeping and compressed air usage. Like all foundries, we manually clean out all of our molds using a small compressed air hose, and we use dry backs to keep our foundry clean. This is standard practice. Under this proposal, we would no longer be allowed to use dry sweeping, and our only alternative would be to use wet vacuuming. As a foundry person, you know you never, ever want to introduce water into a foundry environment, as an explosion could occur and lives would be at stake, yet this regulation requires it. It dismisses the use of personal protective equipment as a primary approach to protecting employees. Many employers have invested in clean air respirators, which are utilized where there is a substantial increased risk of silica exposure. Unfortunately, OSHA's proposal measures the air outside of the respirator, which is not indicative of what the coworker is inhaling. Expected cost of compliance for just the dust collection systems required are estimated at $1 million. This does not even include the cost of engineering time, attaining new permits, which may not even be granted, administrative costs, and new ventilation and cleaning systems. Under this regulation, there is also no guarantee that the lower standard can be met, and there is uncertainty that it can even be properly measured. The estimated cost of this regulation by OSHA for the foundry industry is $43 million, while outside analysts estimate the cost to be over $2.2 billion annually. Obviously, the impact on small business was not properly taken into account. Foundries are also concerned with new regulations that the EPA is imposing on utilities. In order to compete in a global marketplace, U.S. foundries need adequate and affordable electric power. EPA has proposed 2 regulations to limit carbon emissions on new and existing power plants, and have proposed an ozone regulation that could be the most expensive rule ever imposed. Our concern is that these costly regulations will hit foundries the hardest, increasing our energy costs and driving us offshore. We would like to see the OMB and other federal agencies also take into account the cumulative impact of all the regulations. In closing, keep in mind that the United States has the cleanest, safest, and most efficient foundries in the world. Adding more regulations which may not be verifiable and perhaps cost prohibitive will force some of our foundries to shut down, and products will be taken offshore. This will have the unintended consequences of increasing world pollution, rewarding countries with unsafe work practices at the expense of diminishing our country's own economic growth and putting our national defense at stake. Thank you again for this opportunity, and I would gladly answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Mr. Anderson, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Congressman Huizenga, for that kind introduction, and thank you, Chairman Shabbat, Ranking Member Velasquez, and members of this committee. I appreciate the opportunity to testify today on behalf of Structural Concepts Corporation and AHRI. Structural Concepts was founded in 1972 and is located in Muskegon, Michigan. We manufacture commercial refrigerated equipment. Basically, we make the refrigerated merchandiser or display that you would find at your local grocery store or restaurant. Our products ensure that food is stored safely and is accessible in all corners of our country, from mom-and-pop shops to the largest supermarket chains. Like so many small businesses across the country, Structural Concepts is deeply rooted in our community. Our friends, our neighbors, and our town depend on jobs we provide. Unfortunately, small businesses like ours are facing significant new regulatory burdens from federal agencies, and that is why I'm here today. First, it is important for me to tell you that my company is not anti-regulation. Like many of our fellow AHRI members, we consider ourselves to be concerned citizens, responsible neighbors, and leading innovators. We have complied fully with previous regulations and even exceeded our obligations. What I am here to talk about, however, is the burden of conflicting regulations on businesses like mine and the need for regulatory certainty. President Obama talked about this burden in Executive Order 13563 when he required Federal agencies to tailor regulations to impose the least burden on society, taking into account, among other things, the cost of cumulative regulations. My hope is that this hearing can help illuminate the need for Federal agencies to live up to this obligation. In 2009, DOE finalized energy efficiency standards for commercial refrigeration equipment. Our industry was required to come into compliance in 2012. Over those 3 years, we developed energy-efficient solutions, engineered them into 400-plus refrigerated display cases, and tested them for energy consumption while still upholding our most important regulations pertaining to food and product safety. To accomplish all this, we had to dedicate thousands of engineering and testing hours that would otherwise be used for customization or developing products to increase sales and grow our company. We had to increase our capacity, accuracy, and throughput of our test labs. We had to develop new manufacturing processes and supply chains to produce our own condensing units. In the end, we reduced the carbon footprint of our entire self-contained product offering by approximately 50%. We felt proud of this fact that we complied with the new DOE energy levels, and in most cases went above and beyond. Unfortunately, we soon found out that wasn't enough. Last year, only 2 years after the compliance deadline for the old rules, DOE again updated its standard with more stringent energy efficiency criteria. The new standards, which have to be met by 2017, obviate many of the investments that were made to comply with the 2012 rule. Quite simply, after making huge investments based on regulatory reality, DOE moved the goalposts. To make matters worse, EPA proposed a rule last year that will take away the current refrigerant used in all of our self-contained refrigerated systems on January 1st, 2016. That's only 9 months away. The alternative refrigerants EPA proposed were either too flammable and limited the amount of refrigerant we could use in each system, or they increased the energy consumption in our application. If finalized, EPA's proposal would have significantly raised energy consumption of all of our products and violated the new DOE energy regulations. After we submitted comments to the EPA, the agencies offered up alternative refrigerant we could use, R450A. Although this is much better than the previous alternatives, it still has its challenges. Production of the new refrigerant and regulatory approval of compressors can take years to implement. All of our systems will again need to be redesigned and tested to see how the new refrigerant impacts energy efficiency. Here is our primary problem. DOE is requiring us to comply with new energy standards on January 1st, 2017. EPA is proposing compliance with their new rule on January 1st, 2016. While it's possible the EPA's compliance date will slip, DOE is mandated to review energy levels every 5 years. This means that in 2022, we may have to review our product yet again. My point is this: if DOE and EPA do not coordinate their efforts, we could potentially be redesigning our product every 2 to 3 years for 12 or more years in a row at great expense. Combined, the compliance burdens associated with these two rules could devastate our industry. My purpose today is to draw the committee's attention to the regulatory burdens faced by small businesses everywhere. The regulations I just described, both specifically designed to address the commercial refrigeration industry, will not only increase our costs, but will force structural concepts to reduce the number of products manufactured, throw uncertainty into the current and future products offered, and overall result in reduced employment. We are not a large corporation with a plethora of resources to redirect towards the review, testing, and compliance of new rules. We are a small, innovative manufacturer that makes refrigerated display cases, hardly the nexus point of the nation's energy and environmental policy battles. Our company and thousands of companies like ours across the nation make a big difference in the stability of the economic recovery, which has only just begun to take hold. Again, we are not anti-regulation. We are simply asking Federal agencies to consider the impacts of cumulative regulations on businesses like ours and live up to the guidelines articulated in President Obama's executive order. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here today, and I look forward to answering questions.
Thank you very much. Mr. Goodwin, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Velasquez, and members of this committee, I appreciate the opportunity to testify today on why ensuring a robust regulatory system is both necessary to and consistent with a strong economy in which smaller manufacturers can thrive and prosper. In my testimony today, I will make 3 points. 1, regulations are essential for safeguarding the public. 2, regulations can and do provide important economic benefits for smaller businesses, including those in the manufacturing sector. And 3, The SBA Office of Advocacy appears to be working against the interests of smaller businesses and requires enhanced oversight from this committee. Based on these 3 points, I will conclude by proposing an alternative approach to balancing strong public safeguards with the unique interest of real smaller businesses. Point 1. Over the past 4 decades, U.S. regulatory agencies have achieved remarkable success in establishing safeguards that protect people and the environment against unacceptable risks. But serious hazards remain. By addressing these hazards, Americans would be even better protected. A case in point is OSHA's pending rule to protect workers against harmful silica exposures. Roughly 2 million U.S. workers toil in workplaces with silica levels high enough to threaten their health. OSHA estimates that thousands of workers die every year because of silica exposures that are within the current legal limits, which were set more than 40 years ago. These workers suffer just the same, whether they work for smaller businesses or larger ones. Once in place, OSHA's pending silica rule is expected to save up to 700 lives and prevent up to 1,600 new cases of a deadly lung disease called silicosis every year. And these protections cannot come a moment too soon. This rulemaking has been in the work for over 18 years now, and the cost of these unnecessary delays has been thousands of deaths and debilitating illnesses that weren't prevented but should have been. Point 2. The economic benefits of regulation for businesses can be significant, but are all too often overlooked. Here are just 4 types of these benefits. First and foremost, smaller businesses receive a significant productivity dividend when their workers and their workers' families are healthy and safe. Second, regulations can help to create new markets and opportunities for entrepreneurs. Third, regulations can even spur businesses to revolutionize their production processes in ways that lead to greater productivity and profitability. In my written testimony, I discussed in detail how OSHA's 1978 cotton dust rule had precisely this kind of effect. Fourth, as recent episodes illustrate, when industrial-scale catastrophe results from a failure to regulate adequately, the attendant costs tend to fall disproportionately on smaller businesses. Here I can speak from personal experience. My uncle in Alabama has struggled to keep the doors open to our family's decades-old restaurant supply company after the 2010 BP oil spill, as a resulting downturn in tourism has obliterated much of the company's customer base. Stronger regulations that are necessary for preventing these catastrophes or for minimizing their harmful effects would thus deliver particularly large benefits to many small businesses like his that might otherwise be caught in harm's way. Point 3. In a recent GAO report, the GAO raised serious concerns about the Office of Advocacy's job performance. Among other things, the report describes how the GAO could find no evidence that the Office of Advocacy ever interacts with smaller businesses in the course of conducting its duties, such as developing comment letters on pending rulemakings. Yet, investigative work by my organization and by the Center for Effective Government has found copious evidence of communications between the Office of Advocacy staff and large trade associations that are dominated by their large business members. The bottom line is that smaller businesses continue to lack a voice in government, while the larger businesses they compete against have their already loud voice amplified on the taxpayer's dime. In the brief time I have remaining, I would like to make a modest plea that we hit the raise up button on this ongoing regulatory debate so that we can chart a new path forward. Moving forward means finding ways to help smaller businesses meet their regulatory obligations and to do so in ways that will not undermine their ability to compete with larger firms in their industry. Over the years, Congress has taken some small steps towards enhanced compliance assistance for smaller businesses. With some creative thinking, these efforts can and should be expanded. I'll highlight just a few potential creative solutions here. First, providing monetary assistance in the form of grants or subsidized loans to truly small businesses so they can meet higher regulatory standards. Second, expanding existing regulatory compliance assistance programs. And third, partnering small businesses to promote beneficial synergies on regulatory compliance. Thank you. I'd be pleased to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your testimony. I appreciate the testimony of all the witnesses. And Ms. Reichert, I'll go to you first if that would be okay. You mentioned in your testimony about Canada and the European Union providing an exemption for labeling for small bottles while OSHA did not. How does this put the United States manufacturers like yourself in an economic disadvantage when you're trying to compete on international markets?
Okay, from an economic disadvantage standpoint, our competitors do not have to also provide the same labeling. The process of producing that labeling for us means that we've had to buy new printers that are very expensive. We've had to make all of that investment. We have to take the labor cost to produce all of those labels. And because OSHA gave no guidance, we've had to figure out a way to properly attach those labels to our product. And I can show you for us what that looks like. We've had to take our bottle, produce our printer material in color now, and have the labor to fold it into 4 squares so that it fits into this chemically impervious pouch and attach it. Each one, 10,000 of those products per year, and our competitors don't have to do so.
Thank
So
you.
it's a complete disadvantage for us.
Thank you very much. Ms. Herskovich, let me return to you. You talked about the silica rule. If that rule were finalized, you mentioned about the significant cost to you and the fact that it's arguable whether safety would be improved. In fact, in many instances, might be just the opposite effect. And how would, if that rule went into effect, how would that impact your ability to grow, create more jobs? And I also noted when Mr. Goodwin was talking about the silica rule, you seem to cringe a little bit, and so if you would like to comment on that, I'd be happy to hear your.
Absolutely. And again, this is a one-size-fits-all rule. And we have 13 employees in our foundry. We pour 1 heat a day. And we're now being lumped in with the Bethlehem Steels of the world and all those other companies to be able to have to comply. We currently have 3 dust collection systems, one over our furnaces, and we have what's called an AOD refining vessel, which collects all that dust. We're also putting in a heat exchanger, which is going to get rid of some of those small fines and also get us a better quality casting. So we have a very strong safety program. We have employees internally. We have a safety committee. We have safety leaders. Anybody can stop a heat at any time if they feel that it's unsafe. They have OSHA masks that are qualified. We also have a clean air mask at the cost of, I think it was $10,000 in the powder burning area to be able to do that. So I do feel that our foundry environment is very, very safe, and there is very little risk of silicosis, but realize it is still a foundry. And if we were to implement this, if the 4 dust collection systems that we've already invested in, whether or not you can get a used one, because foundry dust collection systems have to be much stronger. And so if we could get a used one, maybe we'd be looking at $500,000. And if not, it would be up to $1 million. Now realize this is a 13-person foundry with revenue of just over $4 million. So it becomes very, very difficult. And introducing water into a foundry process is terrible. As soon as you put water into molten metal, you get a huge explosion. So if this regulation is passed, I'm going to face the conundrum of whether or not we even adhere to it. Are you better off risking the lives of your employees to meet a regulation? I don't think so. I'm very proud of our employees. They're very highly skilled, and I just very much fear that it could also not impact the foundry, but the foundry provides castings for our other employees. We have a total of 150 employees, and all their jobs would be in jeopardy.
Thank you. And the government shouldn't put you in that position, in my opinion.
Thank you.
I've got a little more than half a minute left, so Mr. Anderson, let me turn to you quickly. Do you have an estimate of how much time and money it will take for your company to re-engineer its products to comply with the new energy conservation standard? And did anybody from the Department of Energy reach out to you to find out how it was going to affect a business like yours?
Yes, we were reached out to by a consulting company called Navigant Consulting early on. What we have invested, we've probably we've had thousands of man hours into it. So 4 engineers, 4 technicians working for 9 months to comply with the 2009 rule. The 2017 rule is going to be slightly different, where it's somewhat less of a, it's so much less of a leap since the last rule. But the problem lies in that we are gridlocked because the EPA now is requiring a new refrigerant, or they actually took our refrigerant away. So we actually have no certainty on whether or not or what to engineer. So as far as how much will it cost, I guess it depends on if this, we might not even have the opportunity to do it.
For what it's worth, that's the same thing I've been hearing from the heating and air conditioning folks
Right.
in my district as well, and they're very concerned about it. My time has expired. I'll now yield to the ranking member for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Goodwin, many observers have noted the massive amount of statutory and presidentially issued requirements and hurdles that agencies are subject to in the regulatory process. Some have even suggested that this has resulted in the ossification of the rulemaking process. To this point, research has found that it takes an average of 10 years for OSHA to develop and promulgate a health or safety standard. Do you believe that the regulatory process itself has become so overly burdened that it's in effect ossified?
Yeah, I do share that view. Agencies do work under a large welter of procedural requirements that they have to satisfy during the rulemaking process. I think a lot of these sprouted from good ideas, but they've reached this point where they become duplicative and ultimately counterproductive, so that they distract agencies from considering what's really important when developing a rulemaking, and sort of send them off on these wild goose chases that ultimately don't lead to better regulatory solutions for the folks they're trying to protect, or the small businesses that are ultimately subject to them.
And can you please explain how many regulations, and you mentioned it in your statement, benefit businesses, both big and small, especially when it comes to increasing productivity of their employees? Can you elaborate on that?
Sure. I think one of the best examples I've seen is a couple of years ago, I was looking at the Regulatory Flexibility Act reviews that OSHA does on its existing regulations. And I had this really interesting case study about the OSHA's cotton dust rule. And what it found was that this rule directed the textile industry to institute new processes in manufacturing, and it reduced the workers' instances of this lung disease called brown lung disease. But what they also found this by 99%, it was by all accounts just a huge public health victory. But what they also found was this really interesting economic side benefit. Prior to the rule's implementation, the industry's productivity gain was increasing year over year by 2.5%. After the rule's implementation, their productivity gains were increasing by 3.5%, and that's because this rule had largely led these industries to sort of revolutionize their manufacturing processes, and it was a win-win for workers. It was a win for the manufacturers, and their productivity gains led to more profitability and increased employment rates.
And can you discuss your perspective as to how fuel standard regulations has been a real driver when it comes to the development of advanced technologies, energy technologies, and how have rules such as this contributed to the U.S. Standing globally?
Sure. As we tackle climate change, one of the simplest ways, the cheapest ways of reducing our global footprint or climate footprint is to adopt energy efficient products. It's just it's unavoidable. And what a regulation can do is sort of help us move along that path in a more predictable, in an ultimately cheaper way, I'd say, because the process will be smoother. And I think energy efficiency regulations in particular can help there by specifying clear rules of the road for everybody. And the manufacturers that are in the U.S. that are subject to them will ultimately be better positioned to manufacture the best, cheapest, most effective energy efficient products, not only for folks at home, but also ultimately for markets abroad. And the manufacturers of these products in China and stuff, they're working hard on developing these products, and they want to sell them to us.
Thank you.
I think we should sell them to them.
Mr. Anderson, the Department of Energy estimated that the commercial refrigeration rule will result in substantial energy savings to customers, many of which include small businesses like restaurants, grocers, and convenience stores. However, there are significant costs on the other side of the equation to small manufacturers like yourself, as well as transitional costs to consumers. How do you propose that we best balance these costs and benefits in the rulemaking process?
Well, as far as balancing the costs, for small manufacturers, I would like to ask DOE. I would like to have DOE make some changes as far as the 2017 rule and ask Congress to create a bill to actually remove the 2017 restrictions, change the time frame in between the intervals for when we have to redesign our product. Right now, it's only we have to redesign every 5 years. That doesn't give us any breathing room. There's cumulative regulations with the EPA. So the EPA is throwing in that we have to change our refrigerants, and I'm not off the subject. So we have to take into account what the energy efficiency will be with a new refrigerant. So they need to have a coordinated effort at some point in time. Right now, we will be out of business. Well, we will be out of business if we are supposed to use R450A on January 1st of 2016. What I suggest is that some type of bill be written so that in 2022, when the DOE needs to have their next revision of the standards, that they couple that with the EPA's proposal and whatever refrigerant they may come up in between then. That way we can work on a supply chain, we can work on all the new innovations within the same amount of time frame that we can have a good, efficient product.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. The gentlelady's time's expired. If the ranking member is okay with it, I'm going to yield to the gentleman from Michigan who's not on this committee, but we would extend the same courtesy to members on the Democratic side if you would like to do that in the future. The gentleman from Michigan is recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I deeply appreciate that, and my other colleagues that are on the committee allow me to sneak out of our other hearing and come here. So I just want to get this straight. We just heard that in battling our climate footprint, having regulations in conflict like this help move along in a more predictable and cheaper way, American business. There are clear rules of the road, and that your employees have become more productive as you've been trying to build your businesses. I'm just curious what your response is to that. And we can start with Ms. Richard.
Okay, so we're more productive at less cost, et cetera. I don't think regulations actually accomplish that. Let me say that we support strong health and safety regulations based on sound science that protect consumers.
And by the way, if I can just jump
sure.
in, it's kind of sad that everybody has to put this disclaimer in.
Gotcha.
Okay, you're looking at the grandson of a man who was part of the original sit-down strikes with Oldsmobile in Flint, Michigan. All right? My family is directly tied to those first needs of safety and concern for employees. We are well beyond a discussion about safety for our employees when we're talking about the EPA and DOE not getting on the same sheet of music here, and as you're dealing with your regulations. But please quickly go ahead.
So we aren't asking for regulations to be eased in regard to health and safety. We're asking for them to be worked on in partnership with industry so that they don't end up being unnecessarily burdensome and complex. A more complex program does not always compute to a better program. Understanding that nothing has changed in regard to the materials that we're delivering or that our workers are handling. It's simply more complicated. And now they have to be trained. They have got a lot more training. They have to be using different systems. We've taken perfectly good printers, and I'm a huge advocate for sustainability, and we've had to throw them away. They've been obsoleted.
There's a little bit of irony there.
So nothing good has come out of this particular regulation as far as health and safety goes.
Ms. Hershowitz?
Congressman, first I would submit to you that we never would have won World War II had we had, I'll start over. Congressman, I would submit to you we never would have won World War II had we had half these regulations in place. But having said that, we are in a global marketplace. A friend of mine was recently in a foundry in China, and they were pouring molten metal without shoes. And he asked them, how can they not have on safety equipment? And the response was, there's 20 people that want that particular job. So we have to absorb that. We have to absorb.
It's an unlevel playing field.
It's a very unlevel playing field. And what we're doing is we're pushing jobs we're pushing jobs to China. We're pushing jobs to India where they don't have these regulations.
So, Mr. Anderson, I'm assuming that hiring consultants to figure out the labyrinth of new federal regulations is not exactly viewed as job growth, correct?
No, it is not. We wear many hats in our company. I wear a lot of hats myself. It's not easy reading through 6,000 pages of regulatory rules of that stack over there.
And again, this was just February. And by the way, February, there was a federal holiday, so thank the Lord, because there would be another stack on top of here. So,
yeah, we absorb all of the costs of regulatory. So as far as reducing the costs or making us more competitive, regulations don't do that for structural concepts. And to increase energy efficiency in our product, we typically have to go to the next technical components, take it from a fluorescent light to an LED light, and have to wait for that life cycle curve for the cost to come down. And with the speed at which all this stuff is coming at us, that life cycle cost gets pushed into our product. It will come down, and it has come down, but we still have to absorb a lot of that cost in the meantime.
Mr. Chairman, coming from industrial states like Ohio and Michigan and even that little place called Indiana down below us, I think, the states and the people that come from states that build things understand what it means to have a supply chain. And I think so often these regulations don't reflect that reality, and I'm sure all three of you have dealt with that. And I know going to structural concepts, that's been expressed explicitly. It's not just good enough to have a product to use. You then have to have people that are going to manufacture it. You're then going to have people that are going to be supplying it, and you have to have critical mass on it. You have to then re-engineer all of your equipment. Is that not? And maybe just in closing, you can touch on that. And again, thank you.
Yeah, for 2017, or even the EPA, we will have to go through and look at every single refrigeration component in each of our 400, or actually probably 600 models now. That is no small chore. Machine size compartments can change. The physical cabinets inside can change dimensions, so we'll have to change the whole product structure potentially. It is not an easy task to accomplish this.
Thank you very much. Gentleman's time has expired. The gentlelady from North Carolina, Ms. Adams, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all of you who testified today. Mr. Goodwin, during your testimony, you touched on some very troubling details regarding the Small Business Administration's Office of Advocacy Works and the apparent lack of input from actual small businesses in the decisions that are made. This office is meant to serve as a voice for small businesses within the federal government, and obviously it's necessary to ensure that the office carries out this directive. But more importantly, we must ensure that small businesses have adequate representation. In your opinion, what are some steps that can be taken to ensure that the SBA Office of Advocacy Works is listening and speaking for real small businesses?
Well, I would echo a lot of the recommendations that were made in the GAO report, and they called upon the Office of Advocacy to do a better job documenting their outreach efforts in developing recommendations that they include in their comment letters. So I think just greater transparency would go a long way, because if if people know who they're talking to, then they have they'll be much more strongly encouraged to talk to small businesses. So I think that's a big part of it. I think on a big part of it would be on this. Certain agencies have to do something known as or I call them SBREFA panels. Under SBREFA, they have to do panels where they discuss rules before they're formally proposed, and they could take steps to make sure that actual small businesses are participating in those panels rather than representatives of large trade associations.
Okay. And do you think it's important to see that not only small businesses have a voice, but also that small communities within small businesses, such as black or minority-owned businesses, have guaranteed representation within this office?
I haven't really thought about minority representation, but it certainly would make sense. I think it's important to have, in particular, to have small businesses. If their statutory mission is to serve as a voice of small businesses, then they should at least be listening to the voices of small businesses. And from what I've seen and from the GAO has seen, that's just not happening. Instead, what we're seeing is emails between Office of Advocacy staff and these lobbyists for large trade associations. At the very minimum, that needs to change.
All right. The black and minority-owned business voices matter as well. Thank you for your comment.
I don't disagree.
You spoke of some ways that we can avoid an either-or mentality when it comes to protecting the public and empowering small businesses. One was to partner small businesses to promote beneficial synergies on regulatory compliance. So can you expound just a little bit upon what it would look like and how it would benefit small businesses in meeting regulation standards?
Sure. And I was just trying to think of creative solutions for how regulatory compliance, which nobody likes, but could be turned into a plus for folks. And I know that the Small Business Administration, which is distinct from the Office of Advocacy, runs contract programs in connection with government services. So building off those contracting programs, perhaps a program could be designed where the SBA would identify the kinds of small businesses that might provide compliance assistance, so things like small law firms, small accountant firms, that sort of thing, small engineering consultant firms, that sort of thing. And then they could be partnered up with small businesses in this way where, one small business's compliance provides business for another small business. Everybody wins.
Okay. You also spoke about how regulatory benefits exceed regulatory costs by almost 8 to 1, reducing the burden to not only small businesses but the American public in general. So, can you speak more? Can you speak more to the savings that can be achieved by regulation compliance? For instance, lost work days, less hospital visits, et cetera.
Sure. And one thing that's worth emphasizing on that 8 to 1 cost benefit analysis is that it's highly skewed away from benefits and in favor of costs. So that probably understates it a great deal. But taking on your question, one of the big costs that the Clean Air Act has been able to address over the last 20 years or so is reducing missed work days, reduced activity days, missed school days. If a kid is sick, his parents have to take time off. All these sorts of things are important benefits of these public health regulations that save society a lot of money and do a lot of good for business as well.
Thank you. I think I'm just about out of time. I yield back, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. The gentleman yields back. I'll now yield 5 minutes to the gentleman from Kansas, Mr. Hulskamp.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate your technical language. It was either stupid or dumb regulation. Dumb. And for the record, and if unanimous consent, I'm opposed to dumb regulations as well. But, ma'am, if I might, can you hold up your bottle and the big sheet? And as you understand the regulations, these are coming out, and I didn't catch, which agency is requiring this?
This is the GHS regulation out of OSHA.
Okay. OSHA is requiring that. How did they tell you to wrap that around the bottle?
That's an excellent question. There's actually no guidance given from OSHA in regard to applying this label to this bottle.
Okay.
So every single company has had to adopt their own avenue for accomplishing that. Some companies
And
wrap
what would
giant
OSHA,
labels.
what would they fine you if you didn't comply with some mysterious regulation? Again, we're not pursuing.
Well, OSHA fines are, I can't answer that question because OSHA fines are typically done on a basis where they do an analysis of each individual time that it happened and how many times you shipped
Yeah,
it.
okay.
It-
What's
it'd be a lot of
toxic
money.
in that bottle?
Pardon me?
What's toxic in that bottle?
There's nothing toxic
There's
in this
nothing
bottle.
toxic in that
No,
bottle.
there's nothing toxic in this bottle.
Okay, I want to clarify that. And I had a letter from a manufacturer, National Association of Manufacturer member. I was at least in their community last week, and they had an OSHA inspection. And this is a little sticker on a shift knob on a forklift, and it's a $1.41 sticker, and they received about a $800 fine multiplied by 2. But OSHA had been by the facility numerous times, and they didn't see it missing, I guess, till this time. Before they left the facility, OSHA had they had actually put the sticker on the gear shift, but that wasn't good enough. And so I would take a little exception with Mr. Goodwin's comment that nobody likes regulatory compliance. From what I understand for OSHA, they love regulatory compliance.
Yes.
And as from what I hear from my manufacturers and the other businesses subjected to this compliance, to quote my manufacturers, I've never been through an inspection when issued citations were directly related to the actual hazards we work with. And the whole
Exactly.
issue here is to reduce hazards. For what I hear from OSHA and numerous other agencies, it's not about the hazards, it's about the enforcement.
Yes.
And so you run in these crazy situations where you have the administration, as you indicated, is going after raising our cost of electricity. And the end result is we drive your business offshores. And we drive them to other countries like China that have a much lower standard. And so no new, for example, no new coal-fired power plants, but they're building them up every day in China. The end result is we worry about global pollution, supposedly, but the end result, we make that happen. But I wanted to ask Mr. Goodwin, if I could, an issue is the Waters of the U.S. rule, and I see the Center for Progressive Reform has been strongly in favor of that rule. Is that still your position?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and I would say I totally disagree with that position. If you want to create uncertainty in the agriculture industries, small manufacturing industries, construction industry, the industries here, every industry is using some type of water. It's going to be devastating. Not because of the impact, but because we don't know what it is. No one knows. And it might create tremendous jobs in Washington, D.C. and create jobs for think tanks. But at the end of the day, you folks have to comply. Who here, and Mr. Anderson might read the Federal Register. I'm sorry you have to do that. But what about you two ladies? Who regularly reads the Federal Register in your shops?
We can't actually spend the time reading the Federal Register. Our company spends over $750,000 a year belonging to different trade associations. I heard some comments in regard to trade associations shouldn't be able to call on SBA, and I thoroughly disagree with that. Small businesses lack resources. We have to band together in order to be able to afford the cost to analyze all of these bills that are coming out of Washington, D.C. And we have to band together to have the bandwidth, for lack of a better word, to approach Washington, D.C., to try to work with the agencies to create better regulations that aren't too complex, that actually improve safety and health and wellness of the employees that they're working for every day.
Yes, Janice.
We rely on our trade association, the American Foundry Society. We also have an outside safety consultant who is available 24/7 that we can call at any time if any
And
of our
he
plants
certainly,
have a
is he
concern.
paid for by the government, I guess? Of
wish.
course not. Of course not. And that's my concern with, because these regulations, I think Mr. Goodwin even agreed with that, they hit harder on small businesses than the
my
big
gosh,
guys.
yes.
And you'll see many of the larger companies, they actually lobby in favor of these regulations because they fear competition from the small businesses.
Interesting.
And I've seen that again and again. So I appreciate your testimony and continue to do that. I would also appreciate you, based on your testimony, you do get harassment back from your regulatory agencies. I'm certain, Chairman, I definitely would like to know about that. I have members, I have constituents that are afraid to tell me and let me make public about outrageous actions by agencies because they fear the harassment and regulatory retaliation. And there is no room room for that. So I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Gentleman's time has expired. The gentlelady from Michigan, Ms. Lawrence, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman and Ranking Member. I wanted to say hello to Mr. Anderson. I'm from Michigan, and really glad to see a Michigander here. As you know, I represent the state of Michigan, which ranks among the top 5 states in manufacturing employment. I strongly believe that manufacturers are the backbone of this nation's economy. And as we grow manufacturing, we always see an uptick in our economy. But I also strongly believe in the efficient use of energy and reducing waste. Both of these efforts have generated billions of dollars in savings for Michiganders. So what I want to talk to you about is the Department of Energy, the DOE, revision to energy conservation standards for commercial refrigeration equipment, which is your industry, correct?
Correct.
Can you briefly walk me through and make me understand or explain the real impact your company obtained by complying with the 2012 DOE rule? And then secondly, the impact that the DOE's justification, or what you felt was the justification, in issuing a new rule in 2014.
Yes. The 2012 rule, structural concepts, we embraced that rule. We are a company that strives to make our product more efficient. So we went above and beyond what was required by the standards. Sometimes we went probably, in some cases, 15% below of what was required, maybe even more in some equipment classes. It took us 3 years to do. First, you had to develop all the concepts and components that would achieve this energy efficiency. Then you had to review the current product to see how you could engineer that into each refrigerated display case. And then you physically had to do it. Once you got it, you had to build the case, and then you had to test it and verify it. So there was a lot of time, a lot of money spent on building equipment, building test labs to achieve all that. Self-contained, we do make the most efficient refrigeration self-contained open display case in the U.S., we believe. So when 2017 came along, they took another 20% out. In most cases, most cases, we can still achieve that energy with minimal engineering, so it will not affect us that much. But we still have to review every single model. We still have to go through all the bills and review what's in it, review the energy, and in our remote units, they're self-contained and remote. Remote is a machine room compartment that's separated from the display case. Remote units, those suffer the most. So to comply with the 2017 rule, we will have to switch as a standard to across-the-board LED lights in all of our product. So fluorescent lights will go away in 2017 as the rule stands. So reviewing all 600 models will put another burden on us and actually eliminate another product in the United States not least for us, the fluorescent light bulb.
Do you agree that the 3 years it took for you to comply and verify that you're now realizing a reduction in energy costs, so there has been a savings to you?
There has been a savings to our customers as far as life cycle costs.
But to you as an industry?
To us as an industry, we as an industry have reduced the energy costs in the United States, yes.
Okay. Mr. Goodwin, frankly, the burden on small manufacturing caused by overregulation is a term that we hear far outweighs the burden that agencies face in complying with rulemaking requirements. Well, do you agree with that?
So the question is that the cost that regulations impose on small businesses are greater than the costs that
of rulemaking.
Sure. I mean, yeah, I guess, yeah, of course.
Wow,
I
that
mean,
was
I've never
really
thought about the
forceful.
question, but yeah, of
Okay.
course.
But what are the costs to our environment, our economy, and not continually challenging current energy efficient standards and improving them?
The
Gentleman's
cost.
time's expired, but you can answer the question.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The cost of not complying with some of these regulations, so the cost of inaction or the cost of delay can be huge. You know, in terms of regulations to address climate change, obviously, well, not obviously, but they are. I mean, it could mean the difference between avoiding the worst consequences of climate change or not. For something like a workplace health and safety standard, the act or the inaction on certain standards could mean the difference between hundreds or even thousands of lives saved or illnesses prevented every year. So, I mean, they're huge, yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield my time.
Thank you very much. The gentlelady's time's expired. The gentlelady from American Samoa, Ms. Radowagen, who is the chair of the Subcommittee on Health and Technology, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is for all three small manufacturer witnesses, Ms. Reichard, Ms. Herskovich, and Mr. Anderson. What could the federal government do to make it easier for your companies to grow, remain competitive, and create new jobs?
Okay, well, I'll agree with Mr. Goodwin at the end of the table that a SABREFA panel would have absolutely been beneficial in this process. The panel certainly would have revealed the reality that there would be no cost savings in a non-harmonized system and could have brought to life proactive solutions that industry could have provided to actually benefit worker safety. Some of the best ideas come from our workers or they come from consumers. Why shouldn't industry be at the table?
I agree. Also, a SABREFA panel getting more input up front, because this regulation with the silica, obviously you do not introduce water into that environment, as I said earlier. You shouldn't have one-size-fits-all regulations. It should be consistent across the board, and it should also look at the regulations where these jobs might be going, which aren't even close to what we're being able to do now. And you should make sure that the existing regulations are in place and are being adhered to before we add on more, which I don't think is the case with the silica sand. Thank you.
I kind of mentioned it before, but the EPA, for us, the EPA and the DOE need to have a coordinated front for us to be able to efficiently move forward with energy efficiency and environmental protection. The other thing that could be done is a more in-depth look. This is specifically for the DOE of equipment. There's 49 equipment classes, and I am of the belief that there was not a deep enough look, nor they based some of their validation on one data point. I have been in the industry for 23 years. I have grown up in test labs. I am a hands-on guy. I don't see how the Department of Energy can come up with a standard based on calculations and validate that with one point. I don't care how good of an engineer you are. It boggles my mind.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I yield back.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentlelady yields back. The gentleman from Nevada, Mr. Hardy, who is chair of the Subcommittee on Investigations, Oversight, and Regulations, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This conversation really gets me. I have a million of questions asked, being a farmer business owner myself. I'm going to go to Mrs. Herkowitz first and talk about the silica sand.
Okay.
In my industry, we're unable to have a confined space, so we have to provide a uniform anytime we have to do any sandblasting with silica sands. So we provide a uniform, do such. But where you're having to do full intakes, do you think it's fair that all I can do is with a uniform and there's no shop that I'm in? Do you think that I should be required to do the same that you are in all industry and have the same requirements you do in the manufacturing end to have full-blown evacuation systems, I guess, or whatever you're having to do?
Well, it would be ludicrous, but I think that Congress should be able to do that to see how difficult it is. But the one thing about the silica sand is with the respirators, for instance, when you said about sandblasting, we have respirators where the person, and it cost $10,000 a piece 2 years ago to be able to put them in, and it's $5,000 a year to maintain. But somebody that goes into a sandblasting facility actually puts on this respirator, and they're breathing clean air.
Interrupt you right there. I understand. I understand where you're at. Where I'm trying to get to with this situation, there's different applications all over this country of how we do it.
Right.
We do bridges, all kinds of projects. Before you can pour concrete, you have to evacuate any rust on that, which you have to go through that system.
Sure.
Or we have heavy-duty equipment. We have to clean parts. It can't be done in a shop. You're out in the desert.
Yeah.
So my comment is, when regulators come up with these ideals, the desert Southwest, which is California, Nevada, Utah, New Mexico, Arizona, you can go on and on and on, major pockets of recreation areas that are nothing more than silica sand. We play on them. We go to our beaches. We play on them.
Correct.
Should there be a regulation there to force people to have to stay off that? Because I believe that silica sand is probably more dangerous from the environmental side from our use of recreation than it is.
Yeah, it would be ludicrous. Absolutely not. I mean,
so let's force all our businesses back.
Correct. Okay.
Down to California or down to New Mexico or Mexico or someplace else. Is that not what you feel like is happening to you sometimes?
Exactly. We get our wedge-drawn sand out of the Midwest, which is the cleanest, roundest sand that you can have, and that's what we utilize.
All over the desert Southwest, sand dunes.
Absolutely, and we have this better sand trucked in from Chicago area.
I want to hurry and change gears before I lose my time.
Okay.
Okay, as a small business person, I've found over the years that what made my success as a business competing against another was utilizing my employees to come up with a better mousetrap, to constantly talk about safety issues and things like that, and try to implement those OSHA regulations, but also make sure that we were even safer than what OSHA did. Would you say that most business strive to do that because that's a competitive environment? We do it naturally on our own?
Absolutely.
I'd like all three of you to ask that.
You want to protect the welfare of your employees, and we have huddles. They can bring up safety ideas. We have safety committees with managers and hourlies. Yes.
Anybody else want to address that?
Yeah, we're a continuously improving environment, and we look for innovation, and we're fierce competitors when it comes to reducing energy and complying to regulatory.
Thank you. And I think that's the way things should be done. And we just talked about it in just a second, so thanking Mr. Radewagen for that comment. But that's what I believe needs to happen from the federal government side. The federal government continues to try to grow its overreach of us instead of working with the departments or the businesses to find out how they can do a better job. I think business would like to work to make sure it's a safe environment. But do you believe you also continue to have accidents no matter how many safety regulations you got? It's what my comment is there is, can we regulate people against their own stupidity, so to speak?
No, you cannot.
Thank you very much. I yield back.
Okay, the gentleman yields back. We'll go to a brief second round, and I'll yield to the ranking member if she has any questions.
Yeah, thank you. You know, I take offense when people say that is stupidity. I can look in the eyes of the children of my sister-in-law who is dying from asbestos exposure and tell her that regulations are stupid or are dumb, even if it means to save one life. Because when you look at West Virginia or the VP oil spill and the impact that it had, so even with those regulations, right? So, Ms. Richard, just this week.
Gentlelady, yield for just 1 second.
Sure.
Okay. I think just to clarify on behalf of a number of my colleagues, I think what we were referring to is we're not against regulations. We are against dumb regulations. That doesn't mean all regulations are dumb, but just thank you for yielding.
But what I'm saying is that lessons that we have learned from the past tells us that even when it means saving one life, and let me just say that I'm very proud that workers in America wear shoes and masks.
So am I.
I don't want them like in China.
I agree. If I could just...
Ms. Richard,
Sure.
I am at that age where I get prescription drugs almost every month.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm very happy when I go to the pharmacy to get my prescription drug and see prints or instructions or do's and don'ts that are written in a label or papers because the print doesn't fit the small package, the small bottle.
Mm-hmm.
So what is the difference between that? When you go to the pharmacy, you would like to get as much as information you need to have in order to make sure that you follow the prescription, the instructions. So what is the difference between that is required from pharma or the pharmacy industry and the fact that you need to add that label to your little bottle?
Sure. Well, first and foremost, the difference between pharmaceuticals and fragrance ingredients is extreme, okay?
Yeah,
as a given.
But the fact is that the label and the information that is required, because it doesn't fit in the label, it has to be printed in a...
Right. And before we had the new GHS program, we were already providing appropriate labeling information on our products. What I'm saying is now the information that we're providing is much more complex, and that complexity is unnecessary in our particular case. You know, there's a crisis of misinformation and scientific misunderstanding in this country regarding chemicals and toxicity. And the chemicals that we have as they're being used are not toxic. So having to provide this extensive toxicity information is just distracting. It doesn't provide for additional health and safety information.
And so you have the scientific information that says that none of the ingredients or elements in that little bottle could cause reactions, allergy reactions,
let me expand. Yeah, let me expand on that. It's important to know that everything is made of chemicals, and anything can be toxic at a certain level. But as we use them, they are not toxic. Oxygen and water can be either, if you don't have enough of them, it's a problem. If you have too much of them, it can be deadly. In order for an ingredient to affect a human or its toxicity to be determined, you can't just look at the presence of a chemical. So labeling based just upon presence
I hear you, and I don't have
isn't
much
beneficial.
Time. All I can say is that I haven't heard anyone saying that they are allergic to water or oxygen. Well, I yield back. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you. Gentlelady yields back, and as far as the ranking member is clearly very passionate about safety, and I would agree with her on that, and I think we all are on this committee on both sides of the aisle. Mr. Huizenga mentioned that his grandfather had been one of the strikers in one of the issues on the auto lines when they were striking relative to safety issues, and so I think we all feel that way. Just to give some of the panel members an opportunity to respond to some of the concerns that were raised, I'd ask Herskovich first, if you'd like to.
I appreciate that, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to clarify, our company is not advocating that we don't wear shoes or protective masks. We spend over $100,000 a year on safety to make sure that our employees are safe. We're always looking for ways to improve upon. My intent on saying that was only to give an analogy as to the other countries that we are competing against. But it is safety first at our place, and I just wanted to make that clarification. I care very much about our employees.
Thank you very much. And
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Reichert?
In addition, I'd like to respond and say that the fragrance industry absolutely provides all the information regarding potential fragrance allergies, and that is part of our process. So that information is included within our information.
Thank you very much. And I want to thank all the witnesses for their participation today. Got a couple more to respond. Mr. Goodwin, did you want to say something? Go ahead, and then I'll go to Mr. Anderson. I'm going to give this side the opportunity to close. So go ahead, Mr. Goodwin.
You know, I guess just building off what was just discussed, you know, that's why we like small businesses, because they do, one of the many great things that they do is they're closer to their customers, they're closer to their employers. So ultimately, they are the ones that are in compliance. They are the ones that are going above and beyond what regulations ask of them, and that's great. And nobody, and you know, there's nothing you can criticize about that, obviously. What I would say is that what regulations can do is they level the playing field. They make sure that those businesses that aren't so upstanding can be held to account, and they ultimately level the playing field. You know, I think that's just one of the additional benefits that regulations can provide for small businesses.
Thank you. Mr. Anderson?
Yes, safety is one of our, it's our primary concern at Structural Concepts. I don't think anybody in this room would want to pull a tuna fish sandwich out of one of our cases that were made so energy efficient that it couldn't hold temperature anymore. So what would Structural Concepts do? We would have to obsolete that product. I failed to mention that we complied to the FDA food code for 41 degrees. We use regulatory UL standards to make sure that our product is mechanically and electrically safe, so our customers don't get shocked, don't have shelves fall on them, so on and so forth. That now the DOE is obviously pushing for energy, so we have to balance that. And the EPA is pushing for new refrigerants. We have to balance that as well. So we have 4 regulations that we have to comply to on our product and balance all of those. So and safety is the highest.
Thank you very much. And I'm almost out of time myself here. I would just conclude by mentioning that we have, certainly on both sides, we've heard the testimony of all the witnesses. I think all 4 of you did a very commendable job, and thank you for coming and telling us what you're dealing with. We passed legislation in the House recently, the Regulatory Flexibility Improvements Act, and in general, what that would do is it would require, when the federal regulators, the agencies that write all those regulations, that 1 month down there, when they write these regulations, they have to reach out to small businesses who are going to be dramatically impacted by these regulations and get some input, you know, how they might adversely, both directly and indirectly, impact your businesses, because you are, after all, the job creators. You create 7 out of 10 jobs in the new economy, and we ought not to be making your ability to grow and prosper and create jobs for more people more difficult. And I think that's evidence down there that oftentimes we do. And that's not to say there aren't important safety regulations that you should have to follow. And my analysis after meeting with lots is that in general, the vast majority of businesses do try to follow the regulation. You look out for your safety. You're not the bad guys. Anyway, all members will have 5 legislative days should they want.
So here we're in the 12th century part of town.
Okay.
A lot of history behind it.
I love how it looks here. It's really beautiful.
It feels very medieval, really old buildings and the old lamp posts.
So the apartment I'm going to show is on the 3rd floor.
Okay.
It's a 2-bedroom apartment. It's a little bit over budget.
Oh yeah? How much over budget?
It's $1,500.
Yeah.
That's a lot more than we want to pay.
That's about $300 more than we wanted, but
the building